Good afternoon, and welcome back to Jeff and the Rabbi. It's been a while. We had a little bit of a vacation here.
Yeah,
We're back. High holidays.
High holidays plus.
Right, I know the Rabbi had the whole Caribbean thing, that whole
Right.
tour you had down there in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
We're back, and we have an interesting topic today.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting topic today. So anyway, what I'm going to start with is Pete Townsend of The Who once said that I know what it's like to be a woman, and I won't be classified as just a man. Now Pete can darn sure play the guitar and write great songs, but he kind of lost me there. I've been around women for many years, and I am pretty good at figuring people out, but I can clearly state that I have no idea what it's like to be a woman. In fact, I don't know a darn thing about women, except that they feel that they know everything about me, and none of it seems to be that good. In our woke society of today, we are informed that there are no difference between genders. In fact, there are actually no set genders at all. Everyone is fluid. Donnie can be Marie, Sonny can be Cher, the captain can be Tennille, but sadly, nobody wants to be Hillary. The modern intelligentsia tells us that men and women, if you still adhere to those classifications, do not have any congenital characteristics, and maybe no congenitals at all. On the other hand, I believe that real men and real women are very different. And you can drug, snip, and tuck as much as you want, but you can't change that. I can prove it to you. Years of research, by me, shows that the average time for a woman to back out of a parking spot that you are impatiently waiting for is at least 48 seconds longer than a man. This is true stuff. I studied this. A man hits the unlock button on his keys, slides in the vehicle, and is backing out of the spot at an average of 15 seconds. This is true stuff. He does not care if his hair is messed up. He does not have to check in the mirror to see if that odd blemish on his face has reappeared, and he definitely does not waste any time tidying up the front seat before beginning the agonizing long process of backing straight out of the spot, which means, of course, that they have to finally go back 3 or 4 more times correcting themselves, while the poor man, the annoyed man, is waiting to pull in. This is true data right here. In fact, I will bet you that Caitlyn Jenner can still exit a parking spot in decathlon-like speed, even though he is sporting a sexy Ferragamo belt and $3,600 Christian Louboutin peep-toe red sole pumps. I just Googled it. It's a real thing, by the way. That is a real thing.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. You can't just change what you were created to be. There is nothing wrong with having different roles in this world. Different does not mean lesser. The masculine and the feminine have always worked very well together. If our world culture starts to view femininity as weak and masculinity as toxic, then all we have left is a bunch of dandified eunuchs running society. And that didn't work well in the Game of Thrones, and it won't work well in our successful Western capitalistic world. To guide us through this fluidity flap and fad, I go right to the source for bold answers. The warrior of woke, the culture cleric himself, the rabbi. I know he can put the Makitza back in place.
There I am. I'm ready to respond to the call.
Yes, yes.
Wow. That's, I'm really just come here for the education that I get.
Me too.
Cultural awareness and amazing.
Yeah. All true stuff.
Especially about the pink pumps. I didn't know about that.
The first thing I Googled, that was it.
Wow.
I'm not wearing them, but I Googled them.
Wow.
Yes.
So here we are.
Okay.
Now, you talked about roles.
Yes.
I think this is a big problem that we get into. We get stuck in roles. And I actually want to take a step beyond this. You see, there are 2 things that exist in the world that everyone recognizes they exist in the world, although they're trying to erase it. But in the Torah, we find it's certainly true. There is a concept, I don't want to get into role, but there's a concept of masculinity, and there's a concept of femininity. Now, in our society, as much as they say we want equality and all that, it's really not true. Our society, being a Western society, really, my humble opinion, even in the feminist world, believes in masculinity. And the whole idea of equality of the genders means that women can also be men. So, in other words, We want to see that women can be athletes. That means somehow athletes good. Women can be CEOs because we've defined that CEOs are good, so women can be them also, right?
Right.
We don't see that anyone talking about women can be sanitation workers. We're not so interested in that. But all the things that we think that men do, that women are good at, that men are good at,
right.
women can also do that. Well, that's kind of a mistake, because what you've done then is you've really stripped femininity of any value, and you really said women can also be masculine, or masculine is not anything, it's non-gender or whatever. But you still haven't discovered femininity. And that's really the problem. Because if God created masculinity and femininity, man and woman, then what we need to do is discover what is the feminine value in the world. Those two things are equal. There is masculinity and there is femininity, and the two things are equal. We don't spend any time finding the value of femininity, especially because many women or feminists are afraid to point out that there is a femininity, and what's that value? And I'm not.
You've clearly never been to West Hollywood.
Yeah.
They spent a lot of time exploring femininity, but that's a different story altogether. But
Yeah.
okay. No,
I
you
don't know
haven't
where
been.
West Hollywood is. I don't go west at all.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
thinking
Just want to let you know.
West
Okay.
Atlanta, maybe.
Right,
That's
right,
about
that's
it. You know,
okay,
like
okay.
I'm just a
Okay.
hometown boy. You know,
Right.
what do I know?
Just want to remind everybody of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, understanding, I'm not talking about baking versus auto repair.
Right.
I'm not talking about any of that. But there are certain inherent aspects, values that are feminine and masculine. And I'm not saying even that men and women have those. I'm not saying that even. What do you mean men and women don't have masculine traits, feminine traits? Men and women don't have them? No, they actually don't. What I'm saying is like this. I'm going to take you back to a passage in the Talmud. And there's a passage in the Talmud that says that when the time came for God to give the Torah on Mount Sinai, 10 commandments, thunder and lightning, fire and smoke, and the sound of God, and the shofar is blowing, and the people are there, and God says, I am the Lord your God, and all that. So it's described in the Talmud as a marriage.
Okay.
That is the way the Talmud chooses to describe it. It's a marriage between God and Israel. And this relationship, marriage, is repeated in a few different places. The idea of God and Israel. The Song of Songs, written by King Solomon. It's all about the king and his beloved.
Right.
And they having their problems, they make up and they break up and all this stuff, right? The king is God. The beloved is Israel. In the story of the giving of the Torah, the 10 Commandments, God is the husband.
Right.
The wife is Israel. Israel is portrayed as the wife, which means that Israel is the feminine to God's masculine. That means you and I, all the Jewish people, men, women, and children, are the feminine to God's masculine. So it really behooves us to spend some time to find out what is feminine.
Okay.
Because we are supposed to be feminine to God's masculine. And that's really important. And God wants to enter into that relationship and make this relationship between the masculine and the feminine. So what's that all about? It's not like one being better than the other. Yeah, okay, one's God, one's Israel. But God wants to enter into a relationship. So that must mean that there's two partners in a relationship, and they both contribute something to that relationship. Because if there isn't some giving and taking on both sides, it's not a relationship. Relationship, like a marriage. If God's calling it a marriage,
Right.
then there has to be some consent, because she has to consent to marry him. So what's this all about? So here there's a couple of things. And one of them is relationship itself. And this is maybe all we'll have time for today.
Right.
But there's a list of traits. We'll try to stick to this first one. I think it'll give us enough to think about.
All right.
Relationship. So femininity treasures relationship. It functions, it intuits and functions in relationship.
All right.
Masculinity is more autonomous. It's more independent. It's not so much relationship. There is value of both of those things. There's value in making relationship. We talk about relationship with God, people making relations with each other, countries having relations with each other, husband and wife having relations with each other, all kinds of different social relations, relations between different things. But there's also a place for autonomy, solitary, solitude. There's a place for that also. The masculine is associated with the more solitary, and the feminine is associated with relationship. But the two of them are both essential. And the truth is, there are women and probably most women at some time or another treasure a few moments alone to themselves, right? There are men that treasure relationship, and they live in relationships and want to have relationships. But it's very interesting. They're different, though, in the way they approach it and the way they need it. If you go back to the story of creation, Adam was created first.
Mm-hmm.
And there he was, all by his lonesome, and, him and the animals. And then God said, it's not good that man should be alone. I'm going to create a helpmate for him. So then he created her. Do you realize that he lived in a world where there was no she? He was just he. He was all by himself.
Right.
And he was cruising along and living that way. He knows what it is to be alone. She never existed in a world that he didn't exist in. She knows about relationship. When she was created to be in relationship with him. When he was created to be him. He wasn't created to be in relationship with her. Therefore, women, or the feminine trait prizes relationship. Communicating, because that's how relationships are all built, it's through communication. Communicating, interacting, being together, being always in a state of relationship.
That's interesting.
Right? But masculinity, doesn't really treasure relationship. Now, masculinity really needs femininity to get into its life, because it's not good for man to be alone, which is what God said. He wants to put relationship as being one of the traits of femininity. He wants there to be femininity in the masculine life. Right? But for man, it's not natural. So it's an interesting thing in the Talmud. It says that women will always prefer to be in a relationship. They want to be in a relationship with men. They want to be in relationship. They want to be in relationship somehow, some with other people in relationship. Men don't necessarily feel the same way. It's when it talks about man and woman marrying, the woman wants to marry because it's always better to be two than one. Women feel.
But
That's
men
an
feel
adage
that
to tell
way.
them.
No.
Men don't necessarily feel that way. When a man wants to go and marry a wife, the man feels, because God's very smart, all this is following the story of creation.
Right.
When God wanted to create a woman, he didn't create a woman. He could, he made man out of the dirt, out of the earth, and he formed him into man. So then when he went to create woman, why didn't he create woman
Right.
out of the earth
Pull
and
him out
form
of
her
man.
into woman? But instead he pulled him out of man. He pulled her out of man. Why didn't he make her separate? See, had he made her separate, man would have said, like, what in the world is she doing? If she's in the way, I was living fine. Now you put her in there, now I got to deal with her all the time.
I've kind of said that a few times, but
Right.
no, but that's not really.
So the masculine would not have appreciated what she brings to the relationship. However, once he took her out of him, so the man feels he's missing a part of him. He wants to go reclaim his lost part and make himself whole. And therefore he goes out looking for a woman to make himself whole and refill his empty space that he yearns to refill. She, for her part, is looking for a relationship. Now it's interesting. When the man gets the woman, he has her back. He's not glorying in the fact that now I have a relationship. He's feeling like, I am now whole. I have acquired a wife. I got my part back. She is thinking, oh wow, this is wonderful. I'm now in a committed relationship. It's really good. But the bottom line is they're really talking two different languages.
That part I can agree with.
And that is where there's a lot of understanding needs to come about. She is looking to get one thing out of that relationship, and he something else. He's not even looking for a relationship. He's looking for a sense to be whole because he's lost what he had, and he lost it. But God was smart enough. See, had God not taken her out of him, they would have been at odds with each other, quarreling all the time. What do I need you for? She would be desperately trying to get hooked up to him because she wants to be connected in a relationship, and he would be always trying to like, get out of here, you're in my way, you're making trouble. But instead, God took her out of him. Now he feels like, I need to get my part back. I'm empty. There's a gap in me which needs to be filled.
I'm thinking, we should take this one conversation on the road and see how many places we get thrown out of. Let's take it to colleges and universities and see how many places literally we get thrown out of with this conversation. Because I don't think it's going to go over too well.
You don't think so, huh?
For some reason, I'm thinking you take this to Berkeley, you take this to Columbia, anywhere like that. Somehow it's not going to go over really well on campus.
Right. So then, you know what I would say?
What's that?
What is femininity?
Well, okay.
And then, you know what they'll tell you?
Same thing.
They'll say the relationship. You know what they'll say?
They
will say, they'll talk about, why is it good to have women in Congress? Why is it good to have, women in government? Because women understand process.
They do say that. They do
Right.
say that. Well,
What do you mean process?
contradiction there.
What do you mean they understand process? What does that mean? They understand. First of all, what you're saying is women are different, right? Because they understand something that men don't understand, which I happen to agree with. But you're saying women understand process. Why? Because their whole idea of creating relationship, they are completely absorbed with the process of getting the relationship. Men don't understand that. Men don't relate to that. So many of the traits that I say that people wouldn't like just because they don't like the way it smacks of, because they don't want women or men to be pigeonholed into a certain type of activity. I'm actually saying let's step beyond all that, because the truth is men need to understand the feminine. A man needs to be feminine. A Jewish man needs to be feminine vis-a-vis God. So he has to understand the feminine trait. And what the woman brings into the relationship, he needs to understand and actually inculcate. And many women have many masculine traits also that they need. And we need to understand how those two relate to each other. So it's a lot more complex than just saying men can do this and women can do that. That's not really what it's about. It's about an idea that's much deeper. And one of those big traits, one of the differences, not between men and women necessarily, but between masculinity and femininity, if we're moving towards a definition in order to understand so that we can make ourselves more whole, is to understand that women emphasize relationship and men don't emphasize relationship. Men emphasize more of a solitude, or masculinity. I shouldn't say men, masculinity.
Well, this kind of explains the car thing. Back to my theory is, a man, he just wants to get the heck out of there, be by himself, go get his business done. Well, the woman must check herself to make sure everything's right and everything's in a process and a relationship.
Like for example, like why do women make food? Because food is something that you share and give to other people. A man could be working on his car.
Right, I got
It's
you.
his car. And when it's all done, he will drive in his car. Matter of fact, if someone else wants, don't touch my car.
So when when my wife calls me a selfish pig, she might have some kind of a point with the masculine thing there.
Right, so therefore, really, that is true. That's true. That's where the masculine, that when God says it's not good for man to be alone, he's saying this masculinity is not good. Now, there are other traits of masculinity that are important for the world, but not all of them, and we need to know where they balance. That's why, like I said, women oftentimes will be oriented towards food. Not that everyone likes to cook and bake and all that type of stuff, but food is a medium to create relationships through. When I give you something and I nourish you, I connect to you. And if you're a connector, you might find it more interesting and rewarding to create food than to create a nicer engine in your car.
Makes sense. That makes sense. Well, amazing. Whoever thunk that I'd have to go to the rabbi to find my feminine side. I just
That's right. That's what I'm
thought,
saying.
I thought it would be somewhere else.
If we can find your feminine side, wow, we will have done something.
It would be a big thing. It would be a big thing. Well, I'm impressed.
Okay. Well, there's more. Maybe we'll come back to this.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, we would keep going. This could be like a therapy session for me. This is not bad. And for maybe others who are watching.
Maybe.
Okay. All right, well, I guess next week we might be back with more of the same. We never know.
God willing.
All
We'll
right.
see.
We'll see you next week. I'm Jeff and the Rabbi.